Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tennis and Pickles podcast. Your usual host here, Vanch, and we are back for a Wimbledon recap episode. And as always, we have the wonderful Steve Flink here with us. Steve, you've been to the SW19 for several years. How did this trip compare with some of the others that you've seen?
The tournament?
Yeah, how was the tournament for you?
I think it was one of the better ones. It's hard to compare, but year by year. But it certainly didn't disappoint by any means. And we had the great storylines of Sinner summoning the courage and the grit and the determination to overcome Alcaraz after a devastatingly potent blow that he took in the final of the French Open when he had the 3 match points. And then Iga Swiatek wins the tournament, dropping 1 set to Katie McNally, and then just brilliant the rest of the way. And we can talk about it later, but I would say in her case, Vanch, that she's not given nearly the credit she deserves for the love outcome in the final, because she's the only player in that field that would have beaten Anisimova love. I'm convinced of that. It wouldn't. I know that's going to be much later in the podcast. I get it, but I just wanted to throw that out at the outset, that I think too many observers are not giving Iga the credit she deserves for the unrelenting barrage of ground strokes that she threw at Anisimova, the concentration, playing every point like it was match point, almost Rafa-like, who's one of her idols. So I like to put the emphasis a bit more on that. It was unfortunate what happened to Anisimova. We'll get to it later. But bottom line is, 2 very worthy champions, first Italian to win this Wimbledon singles title, first the Polish player to win the women's singles title, both of them entirely worthy champions, and lots of great matches along the way across the fortnight. So all told, I think it was a terrific tournament.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned Iga, we can just cover that right off the bat. I mean,
okay, sure.
Iga coming into this tournament, obviously, she'd made the final in Bad Homburg. She'd lost earlier than her usual, what she usually does at Roland Garros. Obviously, it's been a difficult year up until this point, but what did you see from her on the grass, specifically this year? The adjustments that she was able to make, because to my eyes, she made some tweaks, she made some adjustments, but she was more aggressive earlier on in rallies, and she flattened out her forehand a lot more. The serve was firing, but what I saw was a really light version of Iga. Someone who was just joyous and happy to be there, and who didn't have the strain on her shoulders.
I think you put your finger on it. It wasn't that she transformed her game. It wasn't that she suddenly took a brand new approach to playing on grass. I wonder whether the words of Pegula echoed in her head a little bit, Vanch, after that Jess beat her in the warm-up tournament that you just referred to, because Jess went out of her way to tell Iga how good she was on grass, having just beaten her, but she was still very impressed with what she saw across that net. And I wonder whether that, and just the fact that Iga got to the final, maybe this was a gradual buildup. It was that she had a terrible clay court circuit, but managed to still get to the semis of the French, played 2 wonderful sets against Sabalenka. Unfortunately, the third got away from her in a hurry, and she didn't play great in the third, but it was still a good achievement to be in the penultimate round at Roland Garros, to play Sabalenka tough, to go from there to lose that final to Pegula on the grass, and somehow everything, her head was just completely cleared by the time she got. And honestly, Vanch, you and I have been watching her a long time, and I've seen her play some French Opens where she's looked just as efficient and unstoppable. But to do this on the grass, she's never played this way at a major outside of Roland Garros. Yes, she won her 1 U.S. Open and played very well to win that Open, but nothing like this. This was dominating tennis. Think about, I'm going to look at the draw for a second. After McNally, who she beat 5-7, 6-2, 6-1, she beats Collins 2 and 3. She beats Towson 4 and 1. She beats Samsonova, who's very tough on the grass, 2 and 5, and second set got tense because it was 4-2, 40 love for Iga, and the next thing you know, it's 4-all, but she didn't let that get in her way at all. And then obviously she finishes off there's never been anything quite like this. To beat Bencic 2-love, followed by beating Anisimova 11-love. So to lose 2 games in her last 4 sets over the course of the semis and final. I mean, it was just remarkable. So I can't, I have to admit, Vance, you were much more optimistic than I was. I was really worried about her during the clay court circuit. I was still worried after the French, because I didn't like that 3rd set. I appreciated what she did to get to the semis and how beautifully she played those first 2 sets against Sabalenka, but I didn't like it having to end 6-love in the 3rd. Nonetheless, I was impressed with how she played against Pegula in defeat and how she played that whole week. But this Wimbledon, to me, it's a revelation, and it may open up. It's going to open up her mind to a lot of possibilities. Not that she's suddenly going to dominate the game, win every tournament she plays, win 3 majors a year, but it's going to just completely alter her outlook for the foreseeable future. And I can't wait to see her play the Open, because if she can play that kind of tennis on grass, there's no reason, in my view, that she can't replicate it on hard courts, where you get the true bounce all the time. The grass is tricky with her forehand grip on grass. And having to get down so low, and it's very hard for her to execute as well as she did off the forehand. Less effort required, in my view, for her to do that at the U.S. Open. So my feeling is we're going to be seeing it. This is a revitalized Iga Swiatek, and I'm expecting her to contend. She'd be right in there contending hard for the U.S. Open and with a pretty decent chance to win it. And then it's going to carry over into next year and beyond, because, as she said herself, she wasn't really expecting this prior to Wimbledon. I think she was optimistic that she could play well and do well, but she still, after it was over, I think she was being quite honest when she, in essence, was saying, I still can't believe it. So she sort of found herself again. Meantime, this sort of collides with the fact that Sabalenka took another tough loss herself. This one to Anisimova, so in the semi. So now she's gone final semi in the 3 majors following last year's U.S. Open, and talking about being a bit fatigued right now. And I guess she's going to skip Canada, is what I read. And it just tells you she's at a bit of a crossroads suddenly at a time when we would have expected that she was rolling this year. I mean, coming into the year, if you told me that we'd be sitting here in July and Sabalenka would not have a major yet for the year, I'd say, Vance, please get a cup of coffee and rethink it, because it would have made no sense. And now here we are. You combine her struggles. Not that she's collapsed, but those are still 3 impressive majors. She's always in the running, but she seems to be battling herself again. And she's losing to different players, and some of the old Sabalenka, some of the negative qualities in Sabalenka, and she has many positive ones, have sort of reemerged. And I think she's frustrated. We'll see. I'm sure she can come out of this. Yeah. But I still believe that Swiatek will be that there's a lot of success around the corner for Iga, is my point. And it would surprise me if by the end of 2026, that she doesn't have by then, say, the next 8 majors. Let's take the one remaining major this year and take her all the way. So let's say the next 9 majors. If she doesn't win 3 of them, I will be surprised. I really will be surprised. If by the end of 26, she hasn't picked up 1 more. She might get 1 more this year. But regardless of whether she wins the Open, if she doesn't have 3 combined over the next 2 years like that, I will be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, now it makes it seem like double digits is very possible for Iga, whereas a month ago we really weren't sure, because I was optimistic in the sense that, I saw her fight through that match against Rybakina in the 4th round of RG, and I felt like that was a really big win for her to come through that. And yes, you're right about the 6-love set, but I just felt like now she's going to finally have that grass court prep, and she's finally going to have the spotlight not on her. And the emphasis is going to be more on Coco and more on Arena and more on other players. And I feel like she thrived off of that. And, she just grew larger and larger as the week progressed, and, 20 games at the end. And I totally agree with you about Iga not getting enough credit and it more being about Anisimova not showing up, because I do feel like that third game of the final, where Anisimova had those 4 game points, if she does win
Yeah,
that game,
right,
all of a
right.
sudden, you're looking at a very different match, and she never
Absolutely.
really
Could have been.
settled.
Could have been. We'll never know, but absolutely. And look, Anisimova gets 9 points in the first set, 15 in the second. So she
Yeah.
actually won a lot more points in the second set. But the point, what I liked was that every time when Anisimova had those game points, or the many deuces that she reached,
Yeah.
that Iga was not letting go. It was like, no, this is not enough. I can't. I've got to keep this crowd out of this match. I've got to keep Anisimova out of this match. I can't let her believe there's even a ray of hope. And that's kind of like things we've seen this kind of thing from Iga at Roland Garros. We've seen 6-love sets. We've seen her do that on hard courts when she was playing better on hard a couple of years back. But to do that on the center court, to do it at Wimbledon, it's just very impressive to me. And I have a hard time believing, that given where she'd come from and what she did to achieve this, that this is going to go away anytime soon. I think it has definite long-term impact for her, because she won't rest on her laurels here. She won't be content with this, but it will give her that inner belief that's been so sorely lacking in recent months. And really, basically going all the way from the French of last year to Wimbledon this year, that's a long time to wait for another title, but I think things will change significantly now.
Yeah, and she's never lost a major final. She's made
Right.
She's won 6 now, and she's got one on every surface. And
which is interesting because, of course, Carlos was trying to match her, and he didn't.
Yeah.
It just shows you how hard it is to do, because Carlos until now had been unstoppable in those major finals, including the great escape he made at Roland Garros. But Iga yet to lose one, and she. Listen, she's right now feeling on top of the world, but I also think she's got a good head on her shoulders, Vanch, in the sense that she won't just assume that now it's going to be all gravy and everything is going to come my way now. I'll win every tournament I play. No, she will continue to work hard, because she's a real professional, and she won't take anything for granted. But there's going to be that sense of joy. You kind of alluded to it at the outset. The joy will be back, and I think she's going to have a lot of fun playing out the rest of this year and seeing if she can overtake Sabalenka for number one, but not putting unnecessary pressure on herself to do it. And then, sort of mapping ahead in her mind how she would like to peak for all these majors again next year. And, maybe take a different approach to getting ready for the Australian. There's a lot of things that she can do. But I think that this was a major sort of resetting of her career.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned Arena in the offset, and her consistency is often lauded at these slams, rightfully so, getting to 12 major semis now, like 10 or 11, albeit one against Mira Andreeva last year in the quarters. But, she's consistently putting herself there in the semis and finals. But her conversion, in those semis and finals has not been great recently. She's won 3 semis.
And
she's made 6 finals
again,
and she's made 12 semis. So.
Yeah, sorry, but you just made me think of it. But once again, it's another hard-fought 3-set match. Once again, it's a match that you thought in the end, when she came back from 5-2 in the third there and got it back to 4-5 serving for 5-all, and maybe this was going to be a nice little comeback, and her experience was going to count. And I have to admit, in a way, it's too bad it didn't happen. Would have loved to have seen Iga play her in the finals. And frankly, I think Iga would have won. But it could have been a great final. Could have been really terrific to watch. So we didn't get that. But you have to couple that with the hard-fought 3-set loss against Coco in the French final, and go back to Australia with Keys, and similar there. And these close matches, none of them are going her way. Now, I know that that's a pattern that can be reversed. Let's just say she won the Open over one of the other leading players, whether it was Iga or Keys or whomever it might be, Coco, but she got a close, hard-fought 3-set win to win that title. okay, that could start to reverse the pattern, but it's not going to be that easy. It's really not going to be that easy at this point. And I think some of the kind of psychological capital, the sort of mental edge that she was starting to develop over the other top players, as she's done against Pegula, for instance. Some of that could turn around now because the other players are seeing her lose so many winnable matches on big occasions.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And what's exciting is that we have that race now for the number one because Iga is like 1,500 points behind, and you mentioned Sabalenka not playing Canada. I mean, Iga doesn't have a whole lot to defend in the second half of the year as well. Whereas Arena at this time last year was really the best player in the world. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the next four tournaments for both these players, and hopefully we get to see them play each other.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it shapes up as a really interesting second half of the year, and could be that Sabalenka, the baggage that she's accumulated here, because also, let's face it, sometimes it's how you're feeling about yourself and your game, both.
Yeah.
But to have another little incident, nothing on the level of Coco at the French, where she got herself in a lot of trouble, Sabalenka, with the reaction on the court and in the press conference and begrudging toward Coco. But she did have another unfortunate moment in the Anna Samova match, and everybody was aware that she was complaining at the changer. Anna Samova hit that net cord winner, and Sabalenka it didn't seem to me she was in a position to make a remark about tennis etiquette given her behavior as of late. It was ill-timed and unfortunate again, and that also didn't do her a lot of good. So she's dealing with all of these other issues too, and aware, and she's a very sensitive, whatever anybody wants to say about her, and I'm being critical myself, I do believe she's very sensitive, and therefore this stuff does not roll off her. And that's why I think she went out of her way to kind of make amends with Coco and have them posing for the pictures and sort of show the world that there was no lingering bad feelings toward each other. But, she had that moment, and therefore all of these things are sort of contributing to her not feeling the way she would like to about herself as a player, as a person, as a public figure, and aware that can, that kind of stuff can turn crowds against you wherever you go. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that's on the table that we're going to have to watch very carefully.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And that certainly was one of the things coming into this, was just how she was going to bounce back from that and how she was going to feel like she can be herself. So glad you brought that up. Also on Anna Samova, I mean, how do you see her bouncing back from this? Because obviously on the one hand, it was a remarkable run, and, just what a comeback she's made. She's in the top 10 in the world. She's got all these great wins. She won a 1,000 earlier this year. I mean, she's playing some of the best tennis of her life. She's one of the best ball strikers, one of the best backhands you'll see on the tour. And yet, to recover from this double bagel, it's going to take, it's going to be really mentally tough to bounce back.
Sadly, Vanch, I totally agree with that. Backhand is a beauty. I think she was a little off. Forehand was more of an issue in the final, but I think the backhand wasn't quite up to par. It's such a beautiful stroke. I'm hoping, Vanch, I got to believe that the people around her, family, friends, coaches, all her inner circle has got to be reinforced to her. Look, you got to the Wimbledon final. You got to your first major final. Whether you lost that match love or 7-5 in the third, it's the same result. And you ran into a top-of-the-line, ruthless Iga. And I use the word ruthless as a compliment toward Iga, by the way. But Iga was giving you nothing. Iga was showing you incredible respect by beating you love. That's how they have to approach this, because she didn't want to give you any hope of getting into that match. Forget about it. You weren't quite. You were below par. She was about almost letter perfect. Just remember that you beat Sabalenka in the semis. You had a remarkable tournament. You got to the final. That's what counts. And we're going to get you back there next year, and you're going to do a lot better. It's just a matter of, I don't even think it's spin. I think it's perspective. And and reminding her, as you said, about winning the 1,000, the kind of year she's had, and reminding her that it was no accident that she reached the final. So I feel like as distraught as she was in the presentation ceremony, understandably so, and tremendous job done, by the way, by the British commentator and former player Annabelle Croft, who went out of her way to say, we're going to give you a little time. You know, she saw her breaking down. She didn't rush her. She let her collect herself. And Anna Samova was able to come out of that pretty well. But I feel like they'll be able to get through to her that it just does not change the fact that she made this final. And sure, it would have been much nicer to lose 3-3. Would have been much nicer to lose in 3 or even win. But that's not what happened. But it doesn't diminish what she did. And I think that as emotional as Anna Samova is, she will get that in perspective in the coming weeks and come into the Open feeling very good about herself and remembering that, you know, I hope the people around her remind her that McNally was the only one that got a set from Iga, and Iga had to just cast aside a lot of first-rate opposition and made them look like mediocre players. So she wasn't the only one. They should remind her that Bencic doesn't lose very often two in love. So there's a lot of things that can be said to allow her to get this all in perspective and appreciate what she accomplished.
Absolutely, yeah. Was there anything else from the women's tournament, particularly that you felt like, you know, was a big result in terms of some of the seeds losing in the first week, like Coco or, you know, Keys losing in the third round? I mean, you had the run by Siegemund and you had Bencic playing some really good tennis.
Yeah, I thought it was great. The Bencic, she's likable. I saw that they did a nice interview with her, Chris McKendry on ESPN, and she's good in her press conferences. She's seems to enjoy being a mother and playing on that basis and not feeling the same pressure she did prior to having had a child. So I thought that was a very nice storyline. And again, hers can't be diminished just because she got killed by Iga. I think she's enough of a veteran to know that right off. I don't even think she'll need the reinforcement that Anna Samova might, because she'll realize, look, I had a great tournament. She just beat me soundly, and there wasn't too much I could do about it, but I'm not going to beat myself up over that. So that to me was the other interesting storyline. Coco, I have to say, I think she'll put it behind her in a hurry, because she'll realize, you know, she's come off just winning the previous major. She's got herself out of that one slam club into and moved on to 2, and there's going to be more. There's going to be more in the future. We haven't seen her. She's going to win, I'm sure, several more majors before she's done, and there's plenty of time. So I felt like that won't sting too badly, and I think she'll love getting back on the hard courts in the States. Because Coco still hasn't totally figured out grass at this point. There's still work to be done, and I'm not worried about her. But no, I think the storyline, Iga, it really was all about Iga, and to a lesser extent, and Anna Samova reaching the final, and Bencic getting to the semis. Those are, to me, the storylines that stand out for this Wimbledon.
Oh, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what else comes our way during the two 1000s and the US Open, especially particularly with Iga, Arena, and Coco. I feel like those three are the standout players still this year.
Yeah, and exactly, it'd be really exciting to see. I'd love to see Coco playing Iga. Like maybe they end up in the same half, and the winner plays Sabalenka in the final. Who knows? But that trio, will be fascinating to follow. But right now, boy, I have to say, if the Open is played tomorrow, I'd take Iga to beat either one of them. It's just a question of, can she sustain that and peak again at the Open? But frankly, I think there's enough time for her she'll have time to smell the roses, appreciate the win, take a little break, and then play those hardcore tournaments leading up to the Open, do as well as she can. I think she's going to be absolutely ready for the US Open.
Yeah. And just one more thing on Iga. I mean, obviously, in terms of her overall legacy, her winning 6 slams by now, and obviously she's been year-end number one twice. She's got 125 weeks as number one. Like, she's been very dominant in some of the 1000s that she's won. Like, she's really stacking up this kind of resume that's looking to be like she's going to surpass a lot of the great players. Like, where do you kind of see her right now in terms of, some of the best players in the Open era? And do you think she has a chance, like, even this year to?
Yeah, it's funny because you and I, we touched on this a bit in a text earlier in the week, and listen, her stock is rising again. To have, because now she's won 3 of the 4 majors, so she just needs Australia to round out the career slam, and she could use some couple more year-end number one finishes. To me, that matters even more than the weeks would be to end some more years at number one, which I think she's got a good chance to do. So she needs to just keep piling those numbers up. She's already significantly, already people like Lindsay Davenport, Jennifer Capriati, those types, she's already passed them. She's on the heels of the likes of Sharapova. But Sharapova is definitely ahead of her at this point based on, her career slam. But I just feel like it's almost inevitable that somewhere in the next several years she gets an Australian. Then the question becomes, how many more majors, period, can she win? And I agree with you. She will land in the double digits. It's a question of how far into. Does she go 10, 11, 12, 13? She will be in that range. Maybe the ceiling is 14, but I can see it anywhere between 10 and 14. And at that point, who knows where we put her? I mean, she'll have moved beyond somebody as accomplished as Justine Henin. I mean,
Yeah.
So there's so many great players that she's on the verge of surpassing. So, I mean, is she going to be obviously we're not going to be talking about her, we're not going to be talking about Serena Williams, Steffi Graf, Martina Navratilova, Chrissy Evert, but she will end up probably in the next tier behind those great achievers.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of folks who won double-digit slams, I mean, this is a good time to transition to the men's side. Obviously, another final between the new two, and they've won the last 7 majors between them. And this time it was Yannick Sinner showing terrific mental strength and resilience to overcome that difficult defeat against Carlos. And you and I have been talking about this rivalry for a long time, and over text and over all these podcasts. And you said that it's great for the game if Sinner gets a win over Carlos, and he was able to break that streak. Because I felt like if Carlos won another one, now you're looking at 6 in a row. You're looking at 4-1 in the majors. You're looking at in their head-to-head, and you're looking at 6-3 overall.
Yes.
And the fact that Yannick gets this, and he gets a step closer to the career slam, suddenly this is great for neutral in the sport.
No, you summed it up beautifully. It was pretty crucial, I think, from Sinner's end that he find a way to win this one. What I admired is when you've taken such a severe blow as he did, and he didn't hide the fact. He didn't wax poetic about it or speak it, at great length and go on and on about it. But he kept making those references. And of course, we heard from him in the first, in between Roland Garros and Wimbledon, admitting that he had all these sleepless nights. And it's perfectly understandable. So to have to play him again in the next major, to play Carlos in the next major, knowing Carlos is going for 3 in a row, by the way. And, there was a sense that Carlos might really build up quite a streak. I mean, I thought that if Carlos would have managed to win this, who was to say he wasn't going to be in that the Borg Federer territory and eventually win 5 in a row? But now that's been forwarded, and I just think that was a very big win, because Sinner can say to himself, he will always wonder how Roland Garros got away, and he'll marvel at how Carlos helped to take it away from him. He'll understand all that, but to then beat him in the next major, in the biggest match they've ever played against each other, it's even bigger than the Roland Garros. Yes, Roland Garros goes down as an epic. So as a contest, that one will always be remembered much more than this. But as a victory, as a significant victory, this is the Wimbledon final. There's no tournament any bigger than Wimbledon, and you're beating the 2-time defending champion in the final from a set down. And to me, Vanch, that's what was most impressive was Sinner gets that break. We seem like we're headed for the usual first set success of Sinner against Alcaraz, because in 4 of those 5 losses, as you know so well, he won the first set, even though he didn't win the match. He was almost always winning the first set. And the one that he didn't was Rome, where he had a couple of set points. So he could easily have won that set. So to be up 4-2 and then lose 4 games in a row, that had to be pretty depressing for him, because as it turned out, of course, he never lost his serve again, but he loses it twice, 2 times in a row at the end of the set. I thought it was a combination that Carlos played really well in that stretch, but I also thought Sinner was, he didn't show us his best stuff in that stretch.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered, well, how is he going to react early in the second? There was the danger that this match could get away from him. Not that he was going to quit, but that Carlos would carry the momentum through the second set and put Jannik in a bind. But Carlos played kind of a bit of a loose game in the first game of the second, and Jannik pounced. And I thought that was a very important game. How many matches have we seen turn like that, where somebody's won the first set and then they have a bit of a lapse, and Sinner did a great job. I also liked what I saw in the second game when he was down break point. He hit a service winner, and he kind of yelled at himself. You know, he was emoting. It was somewhat subtle, but at the same time kind of obvious that he was really trying to urge himself on. And he wasn't necessarily directing at the crowd. It was at himself, which I loved. I had the feeling that he just was extra determined, and he was going to, and maybe that was sending a signal to Carlos, not gamesmanship, but he just wanted everybody to know, I want this and I want it badly. And when he was down break point in the second game, he did not want to let that get away, because it was going to be too much like the first set, when he felt like and I think part of that was still bugging him a bit, that he had the 4-2 lead and didn't close the set. And so I thought that was a big game and a big hold, some really good serving. And then actually, Vanch, I felt like the rest of the way, I mean, you know, no more break points until then. He faced those break points at 4-3, 15-40 in the fourth, but he just got better and better on serve. The serve location got better, more for early on. He seemed to be settling too much for me, Vanch, too much for just getting first serves in. So, you know, knowing that he wasn't going to get free points necessarily, but figuring he could set up his forehand and just take control. He didn't want to let Carlos have cracks at second serves. I don't know if that's how he was thinking, but that's how it seemed to come off. But I liked the way he changed it after, as the second set progressed, and right on through the third and fourth, that he was really going after it and getting more and more free points and hitting his share of aces. And he had Carlos pretty confounded on the return. And I thought that was such a big part of the match, freed him up to sort of duke it out with Carlos from the baseline. He was very aggressive from the baseline too, and not missing much. But I honestly thought the serve was the key, because if you think about a lot of these other matches, and I know it's different when you're not this was a grass court that was playing pretty fast, but still he was losing his serve more than he would have liked at Roland Garros and in some of the other matches too. This time most of the holds were so comfortable that he was really it created some apprehension in Carlos's mind that I don't think would have been there. And then in turn, the effect of it all was that Carlos had a disappointing serving day. I guess he finished around 53%. And I think some of that was really the direct result of Sinner's superiority in that department. So I thought it was fascinating. I loved the way he closed out that second set, chased down that drop volley from Carlos and hit the backhand pass, and 2 forehand winners, a couple of beautiful down the line forehand, one cross court, one down the line. He just was a great game to sort of cement in his mind that he was back where he wanted to be now at 1 set all, and that he thought he was going to win, or he was optimistic that he would win. And as I say, I feel like the last 2 sets, the serving just got better and better. When we got to crunch time at 4-3, that was a big game, because the danger there is, what if Carlos breaks back as he'd done in the first set? Same situation, really. who knows what might happen, whether Carlos just goes on a tear and breaks again, or whether they go to it. It would have been a lot of added pressure, tension for Sinner as he tried to close it out. But by winning those 4 points in a row from 15-40 at 4-3 in the fourth, then, he eased his task. He served it out beautifully with it. So, he soared to 40 love and barely missed a backhand down the line into the net tape, and then service winner to close it out. So I would say, you look back on all those losses, it's the best, maybe it's the best he's ever played against Carlos. I'd say it was a better performance than 22 Wimbledon. And I don't know that he's ever played better. So the good news for Sinner, and what's fascinating, is we know that Carlos will strike back too. We know how great he is. He's going to learn too. But we're heading into the hardcourt circuit. And that's Yannick's turf. That's his surface. That's where he's at his very best. And that's where, oddly, Carlos has struggled more than he has on any other surface. And so short term, I think Sinner's in pretty good shape. And I make him the favorite for the Open. And I would say, he and Carlos meet again there. I like Sinner's chances. And then we'll see where it goes from there. Because then, of course, the early stages of next year, we'd be back on hard in Australia, where, again, it might be tough for Carlos to stop him. And then we'll see where it goes from there. All I know is he's added great new life into the rivalry by ending the 5-match losing streak. And then the stats that you mentioned earlier are very important, because now, in terms of the career chase of the two guys, it's not 6-3 in majors for Carlos, it's 5-4. And that's to me is very important. And Sinner, he keeps, at 27-1 in his last 4 majors, the only loss being that heartbreaker to Carlos in Roland Garros, and then winning the last 2 Australians, and he won the U.S. Open last year, so he's been far and away the best hardcourt player. So it brings their rivalry in the game to a fascinating point where circumstances and surface seem to favor Sinner, at least in the near term. But I think the good news is I think maybe he can win a few more in a row against Carlos. We'll see, but he's back in the mindset where he believes he can do it. But Carlos is such a tough, resilient competitor and a smart fellow, because think back, Vance, the comments that Carlos made after Roland Garros, I'm not going to beat him forever, meaning I can't beat him every time. There was a sort of a recognition that he knew he had produced a scintillating clutch performance. He'd salvaged that victory with poise and guts, perspicacity. So many things brought him to that victory. But he knew it was an improbable victory, and he knew that, the time was going to come. Well, it did come immediately, Wimbledon final. And now I think things are beautifully set up for these two guys to take this rivalry to more and more extraordinary levels, and for Sinner to, at the very least, be holding his own with Carlos in the rivalry. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's now 8-5 for Carlos. I think that gap's going to close even more. And now I'm feeling like we play 10 more matches. If the next 10 matches, at this point, I'd be surprised if Sinner didn't at least split those with Carlos, depending on the timing and the surface and when they play. How do you feel about it, Vance? You share a lot of my what I'm saying here, or do you have any? Do you differ?
No, I definitely I like the points that you're making. I mean, just to go back to the match as well, like the serve and return dynamic was heavily in Yannick's favor in this one, and that.
Say that again. Sorry, I couldn't catch that. Say that again.
The serve and return dynamic. I mean,
yes,
won that battle pretty handily, and I also think he made a great adjustment here, where he was coming to the net a lot and with a lot of frequency, and to me that was really big, because to stop Carlos from being creative and extending the rallies the way he wants to. And,
yes.
For him to come to the net 40 times and win 30 of those points.
Yeah.
And for Alcaraz only 23, it just was a combination that you felt like the joy went out of Carlos a little bit, because he wasn't able to play that kind of brand of tennis, because Yannick was consistently rushing him. And he was putting him on the back foot. And I also thought his tactics were spot on from the back of the court, where he was using the backhand down the line really well and kind of opening up the court that way, and then giving very few errors. And I just felt like, in sets 2, 3, and 4, they were decisive, but they were opportunities for Carlos to get back into this. Like in the third set, he has the 3-4-30 all game, and then Yannick serves that 117 mile per hour second serve. He hits another serve to get out of it, and I just feel like in turn he put that doubt in Carlos's mind, where Carlos was having to, hit second serves under pressure that he was not comfortable with. And, you saw a lot of those like kick serves, like 100, 105 miles per hour in those big spots at 30 all induced, like when Yannick got the break in the fourth set. And Sinner was just all over those returns. And there was that brief moment in that eighth game of the fourth where you felt like, okay, maybe Carlos can have a moment of magic. And frankly, to tell you, I was kind of waiting for that moment. And I think Carlos was too, because when he held in the previous game, he was smiling. And it seemed like, okay, he believes that maybe there's still some hope. There's still a chance right here. But the way Sinner served after that at 15-40, the second serve, out wide, that was so quick.
Great second serve. Yeah.
I feel like Carlos will regret the next point that he missed the forehand. But I mean, aside from that, like really, he shut the door there in that game. And I felt like he was going to hold it love in the fourth. And he did. And it was a huge win. I mean.
Yeah, listen, Vanch, I agree with all of that. I would say that you're right that there 30 all is nothing to scoff at. Yeah. But when you're going all the way from the start, or Sinner's first service game of the second set to 4-3 in the fourth, and you had no break points in between, right? Yeah. So you're yes, 30 all is a chance to bring yourself to break point, but it's still very impressive from Sinner's end that was the extent of Carlos's chances, and that really impressed me. And so, yes, I think you're right. He created a mood. You touched on something important. Carlos's mood was somewhat.
There was a lot more negativity, a lot more body language, signs like he didn't quite believe. Like there was that one moment where he was speaking to his coach and the changeover, and was like, I'm getting beaten from the back of the court, kind of a thing, and. You don't really want to hear that.
He was down because he is realistic. Usually, a lot of the kind of macho joy that he exudes, which is a likable quality. Macho might not be the right word, but certainly the kind of open-hearted joy that he exudes. We didn't get much of it because I give Carlos credit, is he doesn't deceive himself. There's no faking it, like I'm going to manufacture this, or I'm going to pretend I'm playing better than I am, or no, he really assesses it. I think in his mind, he assesses it well. And he saw that it was going to be a very tough riddle to solve, the way that Sinner was playing. And he saw that Yannick was actually getting better. I mean, I think he's certainly got better from the end of the first through the second, even better in the third. And you can argue, despite the fact that he had the 115-40 game, he was so dominant the rest of the fourth too, that I don't know if it wasn't like a steady progression. And I don't think Carlos had the answers. And I also think that when you allude to Sinner, how much he came up, he was hitting the ball so hard and deep that he actually was getting more short balls out of Carlos than you would think would be the case. And he didn't waste those opportunities to come in, which I liked. He didn't back off that, but he was so sharp through that phase. Not so much in the first, certainly the end of the first, but after that, there was a lot more dictating being done by him than vice versa. And that had a lot to do with it. And then, as you said, getting back to what I'd said too, the serve and return, it was all in his favor. It was definitely, despite Carlos having some glimmers of hope, it was a pretty clear-cut triumph, which is nice for Sinner, because he's seen, I mean, a lot of their other matches, even a lot of the Carlos victories, it wasn't quite like this. And granted, I mean, even in the French last year, as an example, never mind the French this year, even last year's French semi, Sinner led 2-1. So these matches have been hard fought and often going down to the wire, going to the limit, whether it was best of 3 or best of 5. And you think back to even the 22 Open when Sinner had the match point against Carlos. So this one, certainly with their majors, this was pretty clear cut among the recent victories, and maybe similar in some senses to, but more decisive than the last time that Sinner beat Carlos at Wimbledon.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on this already with the the baseline play and just how clear cut, this was. It makes me wonder though, having watched the Dimitrov match, I know it's much harder to do this, especially when the balls are coming at you 90 miles per hour and the depth and just how big Sinner hits off of both wings and how much he was putting Carlos on the back foot. But I was a little surprised that he didn't go to the slice a little bit more, because that is something he has in his repertoire and something that he could have used it. I felt like a little bit more to disrupt the
Carlos?
contact points. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Good.
I
Yes.
felt like he was getting into a lot of those, baseline exchanges with Sinner, where Sinner's going to have the edge in those, where he's just, if they're just playing, at that really high velocity, high speed. I feel like with
Yeah.
the foot being so quick, that helps Yannick's baseline game, and it just
Well, I don't
creates a
know.
little bit of doubt.
Yeah, it's hard to know whether did Carlos just his mind froze a bit, or whether somehow something was telling him, an inner voice was telling him that the slice wasn't going to work. But where I agree with you is at least give it more of an opportunity. Try it a bit more and test it out. And I don't know whether that would be as effective a tactic if they played at the Open. On the hard course, different situation. On the grass, obviously the ball can stay so low that can be a real advantage. And yeah, he does like hitting that shot. He hits it very well.
I felt like he used it a lot in the Djokovic finals, like the 23 and 24, he used it more. So, and I saw, and obviously, Grigor, like, obviously Sinner was struggling with his elbow in that match, but, like Grigor had so much success with that I just felt like the blueprint was there. So that's why I wanted to mention it.
No doubt. In Grigor's case, he used it and this is where it could have been similar, is he used the slice very effectively, but also was drilling that flat forehand down the line and coming in behind that. So what a combination that was for Grigor. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that, and look, all credit to Sinner, because we can't criticize him for the fact that his opponent, bad luck, and Grigor goes down when he's 2 sets to love up and the pectoral muscle ruins him, or that Novak was clearly not anywhere near 100% physically. But again, synergy, you just have to go out and handle those circumstances, and you can't let your mind be muddled or let yourself get down or sort of feel like you don't deserve to be there. It makes me think a bit of 99 Wimbledon with Pete Sampras is playing Mark Philippoussis in the quarters, and Philippoussis is serving a storm up, and Pete had beaten him there a few times before, but this one was a little bit scary, and Sampras lost the first. They're on serve in the second when Philippoussis got injured and he had to retire. And Sampras came into that press conference almost had a look of I don't want to say guilt, but he was kind of put his arms up, his hands out like that, like, well, I don't. That was pretty tough. I was having a tough time, but I asked him about it when I wrote my book, and he told me he definitely didn't feel he was out of that match by any means, but he knew it was going to be tough. But the bottom line is, when it was over, that was a quarter, and then he beat Henman in the semis and didn't play his best, but was able to peak against Agassi in the finals. And Sinner's attitude, I thought, was very similar. He knew he was fortunate to get off that quarter winner against Grigor, and even said it. And then, he went out and knocked off Ben Shelton the way he, kind of a carbon copy deja vu performance of the recent matches against Ben. It was just, a 6-4 and 4 and very impressive. And you could see that whatever had gone on with the arm, the elbow, that he was okay. And then, he played very well against Novak, despite Novak not being Novak. So it was, once again, though, the similarity with Sampras, that we see the very best of Sinner in the final. Yeah. So by then, he didn't care what had gotten him to it really didn't matter anymore to him what had happened in the preceding matches. He was determined. I think he just understood, Vanch, that it gets back to what you said earlier and what I feel. I mean, if he loses a 6th in a row, and it's 2 straight major finals in this season and on different surfaces, and I mean, there's only so much of that you can take. He needed, for his own peace of mind, to prove it to himself that this time he was going to find a way to win, and which he did quite convincingly. I would like to know. I would be curious what Ferrero would say, or Carlos himself, about that slice backhand and why he didn't use it. There had to be a reason.
Yeah. The only other critique I would really have for Carlos, because I really feel like Sinner played so well the last three sets, but really the first game of the second, that's the one where,
That was a bad game.
yeah, that was a bad game where his focus dipped a little bit. He made routine errors. He just kind of went off the ball at the wrong time, and I just
and surprising because he knew what he'd done to win the first set. He just won 4 games in a row, and he knew that's he'd made his move just in time, and that's not the time you expect him to take the foot off the pedal, but in a way he did.
Yeah.
On the other hand, that Sinner took full advantage.
Right.
I mean, so combination, but that's another thing that drives me nuts about the modern press conferences is those questions were automatic in the old days for players. You'd be getting to all the things that we're talking about right now, but hearing directly from the players about it now, they barely get asked about them. I mean, there's maybe a general overview comment, but when it comes to specifics, key junctures in the match, something like I would love to know what Carlos would have had to say about that game, and did he, was it overconfidence? Was it just a lack of concentration, a slight letdown because he just won the first? And of course, he won the first set with that spectacular stab off his backhand when Sinner hit that blazing forehand down the line. Nobody else but Carlos would get that back low and to the point where it's an outright winner, as opposed to maybe getting the ball back, but where it sits up and Sinner could have recovered and still won the point. So I don't know what the explanation is, but it was a significant turning point in the match because Sinner really took off from there.
Yeah. I mean, from Carlos's end and also from Sinner's, I mean, this match reminded me a lot of the Australian Open quarterfinal between Alcaraz and Djokovic. Just the same kind of, I mean, obviously in that you also had Novak, struggling with his movement and all that, but that just made the game plan more clear for him. And here, you had, it was the same kind of a thing where Carlos wins that first set, a couple of loose games maybe from Carlos in the second, and then Novak just really takes over. And then, you have that chance for Carlos in the fourth to come back and produce
That's what I was going to say. And Carlos played better in the fourth than he did in the second and third, and that was similar to here where he put up a brave stand in the fourth, even with that beautiful point that he played, a game point to get to 4-5 in the fourth. The serve and volley where he made that impossible little drop volley.
Right.
To close out that game, and then that kind of gave him that sort of brought out the smile and the hope again to him because he knew he was going to make Sinner serve it out. Yeah, good comparison. I'd say it's similar because Novak played really well those last 3 sets in Australia, as Sinner did here, but where there was some confusion in Carlos's mind about how he should play and what he should do to stop, halt the momentum of a really first-rate opponent.
Right. And we've talked about this before where Carlos, when his back is against the wall, he's able to produce things that are just mind-boggling at times that you just, but then at times, when he has a lead, he can get a little casual, he can get his focus can dip a little bit, or, he can lose sets against players that, and I don't know if that, I can't really say that physical component caught up with him in the final because it really didn't. I think it was more just, it was Yannick outplaying him, and some of maybe all the winning that he's done the last 6 months just kind of, hits him, and he's not quite able to deliver that magic in the final. But, like some of the performances, like I guess, the first round against Fognini, but really after that, I felt like he did clean it up in the quarters and in the, in the fourth round, the last 3 sets against Rublev, and
he did.
He had the scare against Taylor Fritz as well in the fourth set tiebreak, but.
Well, that's the thing, Vaj. If you just look at the tournament in its entirety,
5 sets dropped.
5 sets dropped. It starts with Fognini, and then he win a second round in straight. But there were just a couple of matches where he didn't drop a set. Didn't like the way he started against Rublev. He finished well, and then as far as the Fritz match, I thought he played a terrific first set. Some incredible variation on serve. He was fortunate that Taylor played a kind of a loose game to open the match. And Taylor was mad at himself for that. But be that as it may, Carlos was terrific. And then, of course, suddenly, the gradual pressure late from the middle of the second set to late when he finally dropped his serve. Fritz was in great rhythm on his own serve, and you could feel it coming. And then he got the love break at the end of the set. And then Fritz leaves the court, and Carlos gets rolling again in the third. But you just alluded to it, of course, was the fourth set was the most interesting of the match, and they're on serve all the way. And there's Fritz at 6-4, and I thought that he was kind of hoping that Carlos's return on the set point might go out, because he really didn't set himself up as well as he could have. It was a floating return.
Yeah.
It gave Taylor options on how aggressive and where he wanted to go, down the line, across court, but he ended up getting in trouble because he played that backhand safely. And then Carlos was soon able to work his way up to the net and play that tricky little angle drop volley and angle volley, and then Taylor couldn't make the pass. But that was such a huge point, because it's going to take Taylor into the fifth. It's going to get him into a fifth. I still think Carlos would have won, but I guess what I'm saying, Vanch, is you're right. In some ways he righted the ship, but in some ways I didn't think he did.
Yeah.
Because I felt like maybe that's also what happened here, that Sinner peaked and that Carlos was never entirely happy with how he was playing in this tournament.
Yeah, I felt like that as well. I mean,
yeah,
especially the first round, like, the second set that he lost to Fognini, like I just feel like, that was a sign already that, like, he was gonna have to get to the final without playing his best, and
that weighs. I think that weighs on your mind, even when you have the self-conviction and this great inner belief that Carlos has that anything is possible. And it gets back to what I said earlier. I still think he's a realist too, and he's expecting certain things from himself. So maybe he wasn't quite sure what to expect from himself in the final, other than that he was going to give it his full heart and soul and try as hard as he could, and also knowing that he had the big winning streak and try to exploit that, at crucial junctures in this match. And of course, it didn't work out. Maybe there's a certain logic. On the other hand, Sinner was nearly out of the tournament against. It's fascinating looking back to the stages where either guy could have potentially lost, because it was dangerous for Carlos to let Fognini into a fifth. Unfortunately, he got off to a flying start and pretty much ran away with that fifth set. But it never should have gone that far. It never should have come down to that. And it was a bit surprising to me that Fritz would be on the verge of a fifth too. As well as he played, I would not have believed that going in, that he was going to get that close to taking Carlos to 5. And Carlos was honest about that too, Vanch, because it was the missed opportunity at 6-4, and then you look at the next few points too. That Taylor, mishitting a forehand and missing that. He had chances on all those points remaining after 6-4 and didn't capitalize. So Carlos, when he talked about that tiebreak, you could tell again that he was just kind of relieved that he found a way to win it. He wasn't necessarily thrilled with how he played there. And it was a weird tiebreak because he was up 4-1 before Taylor took the 6-4 lead. So I guess that was symbolic in a way of his tournament. Lots of ups and downs, some brilliance, but not necessarily the level that that we saw from him in his two winning campaigns in 23 and 24.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there was a certain emphasis on the serve as well. I feel like, he's been talking about that a lot, like serve better, trying to do for more. And in the Fritz match, that had to be the case. I mean, he was going for bigger second serves. He was hitting some 115s, 120 second serves. And, I guess against the quality of returner that Yannick is, it's just a whole different proposition, and then it just messes with your mind, when you're not making enough first serves. And on the other hand, you had Sinner, who was making 67% and 68% in sets 2 and 3 really, and he got on a roll on his serve. And I think that it was that combination that just
what's interesting, Bunch, sitting there in that center court and watching with a beautiful angle terrific angle we have, basically directly behind the court, opposite the royal box. Our seats are excellent. Yeah. And watching Carlos hit those slice serves wide in the deuce court, it was just what a sight to behold. I mean, it's so much better than it was, the wide slice in the deuce court, and watching in the Fritz match, and at times in the final, the way he changes those speeds, he is becoming very cagey at that. But nonetheless, he ends up losing his serve once in every set to Yannick, and he was lucky he didn't lose it more. So part of it was the percentage, but part of it was just facing a obviously by far the best returner that he met in the entire tournament.
Yeah. I guess the one other thing also is that, he's kind of lucky that he didn't get broken twice on some of these sets, because there were some 40 love points that I feel like he was playing very casually.
Yep.
And he was kind of letting those go. And I don't know, like eventually, like I know he won those games, but like the emotional, physical toll that takes.
Oh yeah, that's why
you want to be holding easier than that. So I guess that's something going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say I think he could have been broken a lot more. And then you had even a game like that second set there, where Sinner did manage to hold from break point down for 2-love, and he gets to love 30, and then Carlos had a bit. He was feeling it throughout. He knew there were so many pressure-filled service games for him, and he did manage to bail himself out of some of them. And there was the one service game, 40-love, and he went down the ad. So you talk about casual 40-love points, but that shouldn't happen either. He bailed himself out, but it wasn't the way he would have liked to see this match unfold. He would have liked some easier holes and then to go after Sinner with more confidence in the return games, but it didn't have it. Listen, it was the right result. Sinner earned it. There's no getting around it, and it's going to breathe a lot of new life into the rivalry. And I can't wait to see them play. I hope they do meet at the Open, because I think something extraordinary is going on here, and that would be 3 straight major finals between these two guys.
Absolutely.
Think back to the days of Rafa and Roger, meeting 3 straight years in the French and Wimbledon finals, and Borg and McEnroe 2 years in a row in the Wimbledon and U.S. finals. But to have 3 in a row would just be extraordinary. And yet, strikes me that there's a pretty darn good chance that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like the way, like how far ahead they are of the rest of the field, where, like it's tough to imagine someone going through both of them. Like one of them maybe, but it still feels like that third guy is missing. I mean, obviously you have Novak, and you never want to write him off, but he's coming towards the end of his career, and he's starting to get realistic about his chances and his, and the thing about Novak is the way the last 6 of the last 7 majors have ended. His body has been failing him at the end of these tournaments.
Yeah.
And that was really unfortunate, because I felt like coming into the semi against Sinner, I made Sinner the favorite. I thought he was going to win in maybe 4 tight sets, something like that. But I thought it would be a really, really high level match. Novak would have his chances like he did in Paris, and I thought it would be something that would require Sinner to really dig super deep. And it didn't end up being that way, because Djokovic, I feel like, was at maybe 65-70% of his movement, and maybe I'm being
better than that. I would call it maybe 60%. You could sense in the middle. I thought as soon as we got broken that first time in the opening set, Vanchit, I had this feeling, oh boy, we're not going to see the Novak we saw playing Yannick in Paris, where the straight set scoreline was a bit misleading given how well he played, and his movement, the flow of the points, some of the high caliber tennis he was playing, you knew it wasn't there, and he could not recover. Running wide, the ability to recover wasn't there. And then we saw him in the second set serving and volleying at stages every point. And that's not the way he plays. So it was a giveaway. And I agree with you. That was a letdown. I felt the way you did. I thought there was the chance that Novak could win, but that more likely Yannick would win something like 7-6 in the 4th. That was my gut going in. But that certainly Novak was going to really push him even harder than he did in Paris. And you figure the grass court, ordinarily without this injury. But I think that fall meant I think that did a lot of damage, not psychologically. I just think it did a lot of physical damage. And you're right, it keeps happening. Frankly, I don't even know if he was 100% physically at the end of the French, but he was a lot better off than this. We know what happened in Australia with Zverev, 1 set, and he has to leave the court. He wasn't in the best of shape at the Open when he lost to Pop.
I don't think he was physically right at the Open. He was still wearing the sleeve, and
you could see it. Yeah. You could see that he wasn't physically right there, and then he wasn't 100% when he played Carlos in that Wimbledon final either. So you're right. It's just so many matches. Then in the French, he ended up having to pull out after getting to the quarters of last year's French, not this year's.
Yeah,
So it's true.
Even the Australian last year, I feel like there were reports of like some fever or something that he had
Yeah, something.
after
Oh
the
yeah,
tournament. Like he didn't look right there too. So that's like
no, he
everyone
wasn't right.
basically.
And you remember Vanch, because you watched a lot of these press conferences, you could hear his voice. His
Yeah,
voice is
doesn't
he
look
was
right.
battling.
Yeah,
It wasn't a virus; it was something like a virus. But yeah, so many things have gone wrong. Which now maybe if he was fortunate in New York, and because obviously the time is short for him now. I mean, there's not going to be that many more. We had all felt like Wimbledon might be the best opportunity, and once again, the body betrayed him. And he talked a lot about that in the press conference, the frustrations of that.
yeah. He
But let's
didn't
just
talk
say,
so much about the fall in the press conference. He kind of more talked about this general pattern of feeling,
right? I don't
the
think he
age
wanted.
is
I
catching
don't think
up
he.
and all that.
Yeah, I don't think he wanted to get into the fall. I wanted to hear. I would have liked to have heard more, but I'm convinced that's what must have been responsible. Because look,
Yeah.
Vanch, compare his movement. I'm not saying that he was moving like a gazelle against De Minaur or Cavalli, but he was
Right.
moving a lot better than what we saw
Yeah.
against Sinner. And you can't afford that against Yannick. You got to be moving better than you did against the other guys, but certainly at that same level, or you're
Yeah.
just not going to have a chance. And the game, so much of the game, so it's such an important facet of the game that we never talk about, is the court coverage of these players, regardless of how well they're hitting the ball. And at this level, if you don't have that, and you could tell he knew he didn't have it. And even in the third set, Vanch, when he got up 3-love with a break point for 4-love, it was more of a bluff. He knew I think he was happy. There was one moment where he kind of shook the racket. He was glad he could get a little lead, and maybe if he managed to get that second break, he can win that set. But there wasn't going to be any hope in his mind that that was going to last much in the fourth. I think it probably would have been, a pretty clear-cut 6-2 or 6-3 for Yannick in the fourth. So it was more, I think, that Yannick kind of he seemed to wander a bit in his mind. I'm not sure what happened to him, but listen, all that you mentioned and all that we just recapped together about what's happened to him ever since beginning of 24 at these majors, he's so aware of it. And what's sad about this tournament from his standpoint is, think about the early rounds. Okay, he did drop that set to Muller. I mean, that he was sick to his stomach. Something was a little wrong, and he let that set get away in a tie break. But the rest of the sets were pretty just, clear cut. And then he ends up blitzing Dan Evans and Kecmanovic. He beat him really badly. Yeah. So he was looking pretty good. Okay, De Minaur takes that first set, and I didn't feel anything was that wrong physically against De Minaur. I think he got off to a bad start, and it was the wind. He wasn't handling the wind very well, and he was having trouble with his toss, and it started with a very opening game. He was double faulted on the first point. You could see him trying to practice his toss. So, okay, but he still got through that in four, despite being down 1-4 in the fourth and break point. And then Cavalli, he shouldn't have lost the first set to Cavalli. He served for that first set and then ended up losing in a breaker. But Cavalli got inspired. Okay, so Novak played well enough to win the last three sets. And I thought that might do him some good, that he had two forward setters in a row that, in a way, you want to be out there. Or you don't want to be out there having long five setters, but having a couple of four setters might do you good. But to have that fall happen 2 points from the end of the match, that put him at deuce, and that was the second match point that Cavalli had saved. That was such a shame, because, again, I thought he was moving fine up until then. Yeah. There was nothing wrong with the movement, and he could have come into the Sinner match in a totally different frame of mind and probably physically a lot better off too. So look, these are the hard realities. And he said it himself. What I thought was fascinating was his comment was, someone said something about, misfortune or bad luck. And he said, no, it's not that, it's age. Yeah. So he's admitting that a lot of the things that are going wrong relate to his age and how the body does not respond as well for him at this age. And that's why you kind of have to believe that all of this talk that he's had, and I get the idea of the dream, he wanted to go back to the Olympics. I mean, that seems far-fetched to me now. I think it's more a matter of, can he get something great out of this U.S. Open? Because as you just pointed out earlier, it's for anybody, but even for him, to beat these two guys back to back that's a tough proposition, and especially physically for him too. And so you kind of need a break, and almost could have had a break here if Dimitrov wins that match over Sinner, but he still would have been having this issue of being physically very compromised, even if he didn't play Sinner. So
Yeah.
I don't know how things were going to work out, but let's just say the body stayed relatively stable in New York, and he was nursing nothing more than some minor niggling things that you wouldn't even classify as full-fledged injuries. He would just still need that break of whether he's on Carlos's half or Sinner's, that one of those guys loses, and he's only having to go through. If he just has to beat Sinner or Alcaraz, I still say there's a chance, particularly if it was Alcaraz.
Yeah.
Frankly, I mean, because the Sinner matchup, leave this match aside, it's a tougher matchup for him.
It is.
And it's more demanding of him in the rally. He doesn't get as much out. I mean, Carlos is going to have his patches where he's missing, but doesn't happen with Sinner. So I think let's just say it was Sinner who lost, and Novak had to only play that one. But I would say, Vanch, that, boy, I would think the people around him would say to him after the Open, he's gotten to 3 straight semis, and he's 38 now. So the last 2 of them, he'd already turned 38. And I still think there's a decent chance he's back in the semis in New York. But then the question becomes, are you satisfied with this? And do you really think, given what you've been saying about how late in these tournaments, these injuries, admitting that it's been a pattern where his body has not been right by the time he gets deep into these majors. So that being the case, is it really worthwhile to go on playing next year? Or do you want to go back to Australia and that's been his best major with the 10 titles? Does he want to think about maybe I would think he would want to end it this year one way or another. If it's like a dream finish at the Open and he somehow wins it, what a way to go out. And if it doesn't happen, just say, look, I gave it everything I had for those 2 years after winning my 24th major. It's getting tougher and tougher, because I don't think he really, how do you feel? I don't think he wants to allow some of these younger guys, a Cavalli type, to start making their name off of him, because he knows he's not quite, he's in that 70-75% range of where he needs to be with his body. How do you feel about it?
It's a tricky one because, he's not losing to players outside of Sinner and Alcaraz in these slams.
Right.
So that's where he probably feels like I can keep going and maybe something will break my way and I only have to go through one of them. And then that's the way that I get it. But on the other hand, it's like you're still having to sacrifice a lot. You're still having to, be away from your kids. You're still having to train. You're still having to keep putting yourself, in under the microscope in that way. And then you've achieved everything that you've wanted. I mean, what is he realistically playing for at this point? So at this point, it's tough. And then he has to ask himself, is he content with being number 3? Because there's times where I've seen him and he's really enjoying his time. He's really loving, his kids are old enough to appreciate him playing.
Right.
You've seen his son getting autographs of everybody, and I think some of that inspires him, because he feels like, oh wow, like, I can, he enjoys the fact that he's still able to be so good at 38 and still be the 3rd best player. But I just, it's getting harder and harder to see how he wins.
Exactly.
And he doesn't really need it. That's the other thing. He doesn't really need that 25. It's not really.
No, he doesn't. And that's my point, is that, it's fine now when it's just the semis and he's losing them to Sinner or Alcaraz.
But you don't want to be losing to other players, and then you
don't want to lose to the others.
Yeah.
And to your second point, I just wrote a magazine piece, and I got at some of this in the piece. There's a misconception, I think, even in Novak's mind. First of all, the men should be measured against the men and the women against the women. I hate the idea of these Grand Slam title winners lists mixing the two. So the idea that you compare Novak Djokovic to Margaret Court. Margaret Court is there's no expert I know that would put her in the upper crust of players to be considered for the GOAT among the women. Right. It's Serena. It's Steffi, Martina, Serena mainly among all the modern players. And frankly, I think Chrissy Evert goes above Margaret automatically, in my view, given her record. So it's like, here you have a man who most consider the greatest of all time, and you're trying to wrestle away that and get that 25th major and stand alone above Margaret. But it gets back to what you were just saying. Is that really meaningful? I don't think it is. It's just nice number. It's nice to have the 25.
Yeah.
It sounds better. It looks better. but is that really lowering your historical stock that you only tied Margaret Court? And you did. The bottom line is he beat out Roger and Rafa and Pete and everybody else. That to me is what matters, because these are the people he's competing against. These guys. The battle was to overcome Federer and Nadal, not to have to pass Margaret Court. And I don't know how much he's thought about that, because he has a very keen sense of history, but I think he could forgive himself, and I don't think it would matter in terms of people assessing him historically one bit. Either way, he gets to 25 or he doesn't. I don't think it matters.
Yeah. So what I think now, the more I'm thinking about it, is let's say he loses in the U.S. Open to somebody not named Sinner or Alcaraz, then I think the decision becomes more clear in his mind.
Yeah.
About finishing this year. But let's say like he's semi-decent, healthy. Let's say it's like a Roland Garros situation, then he loses to Yannick again in the semis, but it's a hard-fought match or something. Then he might feel like, okay, I can give Australia another shot. I can maybe want to come back at Wimbledon, and then I think maybe he'll go till next year if that's the case. But
he might. The danger is going to be there if that's the decision, and it would be understandable. The danger is going to be there that there are a few other guys that might get him because he's going to be turning 39 next year. And, and then obviously those injuries, I think he kind of realizes, look, he admits, he's basically saying in one breath, and he's right. I mean, he doesn't know anybody that works harder or trains harder than him. In essence, he was saying there's nobody more professional about taking care of himself and preserving himself and being ready to play. And yet he keeps getting hit with these various ailments. So that's not likely to change next year. So and I have to say, and you know this too, I really felt coming into the year, I felt pretty good that he'd get one of these. And I still believe the Open is a realistic shot if things unfolded the right way, but it is going to be difficult, and it is asking a lot of himself. Yeah. He managed to get his 100th career title. I thought that was important. I thought that was a milestone worth working for. I think it would have been pretty frustrating to end his career with 99. Yeah. You want that 100th. That I get. I think, frankly, that meant more. That should have meant more than 25. Than 25. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's very interesting because, we saw how Roger and Rafa and Serena and how everyone retired, and it's really hard to know what to do. Like I feel like these all-time greats, they just play until they can't move anymore. And then at that point, they say I'm done, but it must be so difficult to like just make that decision. And then, you have some success. Like he beats Carlos in the quarterfinals of the Australian Open, and he's thinking I can still do it. And so it becomes tricky. And he did also say that he wants to be back on center court again. Whereas at Roland Garros, I'm not sure if he'll play that again. So that was also interesting, is that RG, it felt like, okay, he gave like a salute to the crowd, and he stood on the court there for a while, acknowledged, and he got their love and support. But at Wimbledon, he didn't have really that long kind of
no, he didn't.
And something. He didn't.
But Vance, let me just ask you a quick question while we're on this topic. As you know, and I believe it was in 2012, Tennis Channel did a ranking. They came to a lot of us. I was one of the people that was asked to fill out a list. And I think they went to many men. They might have gone to 50 people to try to rank at that point the greatest, do a top 100 list of the greatest players of all time, mixing the men and the women. Then about 3-4 years ago, whatever it was, Jeff Sackman, who's got a very good mind from Tennis Abstract, smart guy, he also did a combined list and wrote about all the players. And his top 10 was pretty credible in a lot of ways. I thought all the names, there were people that all were worthy of it. But I just don't agree with this notion that you can rank men and women together. I would have much preferred, in the case of Tennis Channel and Jeff Sackman, or anybody else that's going to do the 50 greatest men of all time, the 50 greatest women, but how do you compare Pete Sampras to Martina Navratilova? You just can't.
I'm totally with you. Totally agree.
Yeah.
I just don't see the comparison, really. That's why whenever they bring up that chart and they show Margaret 24,
right,
and all that, it doesn't mean it doesn't.
Yeah, ridiculous.
So yeah, totally with you. I think we should also talk about Taylor Fritz, because he had a really impressive tournament to come through the first couple of rounds. That was really a tough draw. Like, one of the hardest draws you could you could get to play Pericard and how close he was to losing that match. And then the 5-setter against Gabriel Diallo and, the two titles coming into Wimbledon. I think it's just really impressive for Taylor to bounce back after a really difficult first half of the year with injuries. And he keeps putting himself so close. And, he's going to try to squeeze everything out of these next 2-3 years to try to get a slam and get over that hump. But I really admire his work ethic and the way he's sort of going about it and how he analyzes these matches and just couldn't have more nicer things to say about Taylor, really.
I completely agree with that. I'll admit it. He in some ways has done better than I would have anticipated. I mean, I felt like things broke. Djokovic lost to Poprin. He at the Open. He's playing Tiafoe in the semis, and then Sinner beats him in straight sets in the final. And I'm thinking to myself, that was a one shot. Good for him. He got to a final, but he was not content. And it's interesting to see what that did for him and the way he talks now. The expectations that he has are much larger. And so he's talked openly about how much he wants a major. So, yes, it was impressive. You alluded to it. The 5-setters at the start, the two of them. He was able to kind of get his sea legs after that and get some quicker matches in and played his way into form. And then he did play very well. I have to say, played better against Carlos on the grass, for 4 tough sets than he did against Sinner at the U.S. Open on the hard. And he had himself within a whisker of a 5th set, which I don't think he would have won, but we'll never know. So the bottom line is the mindset has changed. The outlook has changed. The question is, can he possibly beat those two guys? I mean, he showed that he could compete hard with Carlos, but can he beat them or again, can he, same thing we were talking about relating to Novak. Does Taylor Fritz have it in him to win a semi against Alcaraz to beat Sinner in the finals? And I don't mean physically. I mean, just tennis wise, will he be able to do that? So I agree with your point. It's just, he did not have a good early season. Things were going wrong, injuries. It was looking like, okay, he got to 4 last year. There's no way he's replicating that. Well, you know what? Now I'm thinking again, especially since Novak's going to play only selectively and he's at 6 right now and he's not going after any ranking, but that Fritz might well stay exactly where he was at the end of last year. And we don't know what to expect from Zverev at this point. There's all that talk about how he met with Uncle Tony at the academy this week, and there's the chances that would be interesting if Tony agreed to travel with him. But bottom line is, if you told me, no, Fritz is going to finish 2025 exactly where he did 2024, I would not have agreed with it. So I commend him, particularly given that the early season results were not there. And now he's rolling again. And it'll be really interesting to watch him at the Open with the crowds back with him, and they're getting used to seeing him now. Now they've seen him in the last year being in the finals of the U.S. Open and the semis of Wimbledon, and they're kind of getting used to the idea, and so is he. So a lot has changed.
Yeah, I like that, by the way, that he feels like he's getting used to those bigger stages, because it used to be like, oh, wow, Taylor Fritz is in a quarterfinal, semifinal. It doesn't feel like that anymore. Now it's like, now he kind of, and we should kind of get used to it too. Like, we expect him to keep on doing that again and again. And he had, let's face it, he had 2 pretty heartbreaking losses in Wimbledon quarterfinals to Cody and Rafa. So for him to get over that hump and make the semis here, even though he was expected to, there's still quite a lot of pressure for him to do it. And so I'm glad that he was able to, give a good account of himself and nearly push that to 5. And I just feel like at the end of the day, you want to retire and you want to feel like I left everything on the table. And I feel like Fritz will be the kind of guy that will do that.
Yeah, no, it's encouraging. Listen, no, that I was disappointed back then that the Rafa match, Rafa was hurting already. We knew what was going on. He was clearly not physically right, and then ended up having to default to Kyrgios. So you kind of felt like Fritz should have had enough to win that match, and went right down to the wire in the 5th in the tiebreak, and he got beat. But and then the Musetti match last year was, I just thought, very disappointing period. As well as Musetti played, it was on court 1, and Taylor, that was one of the worst matches I've seen him play in the last couple of years in a match of consequences. Forehand was way off. Yeah. And that was a disappointing match. So yes, I hear you. And now here he is, despite those grueling first 2 rounds, to get to the semis and push Carlos hard. And it's still something of a long shot for him to win a major, but I like the idea that he's openly saying that it would be one day very dismaying to him. He didn't use that word, but that's how I put it,
Yeah.
to not win a major. I mean, that's really how he sort of defines himself now. He kind of expects it of himself, but not in an arrogant way, just that he's going to give it every shot he has, every attempt he has, and leave no stone unturned and try to get a major, which is nice to see, because he could have just allowed himself to be content with the progress he made and reaching a U.S. Open final and a Wimbledon semi and top 5 in the world. And there's a lot of ways he could have been patting himself on the back, and he's not. It's like, no, I want a major. So I'll admit, I think I may have sold him a bit short myself. I'm still not convinced he gets that major, but I like what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from him.
I think it's just the attitude for me. That's just
Right.
That's what I like about him so much. But and then we talk every year about like who's going to be the best American, and it's been him for like the last 3 years, 4 years, and I wouldn't be surprised again if it's him. So even though Ben Shelton, I'm I like the way he's playing on the big stage, and him making quarters and semis is also becoming more of a regular thing. But yeah, it still feels like he's still like you watch that center match, and it's just like he doesn't return well enough for me to feel like
You're so right.
he's anywhere close.
You're so right. You know that Yannick was just waltzing through his service games. He never had to feel any pressure. Also, I was a bit disappointed, I have to say, in Ben's performance in the tiebreak.
Yeah.
To win the first 2 points and lose the next 7. So many errors, and they weren't all flagrant, unforced errors, but I didn't see a lot of discipline there. I didn't like that either. And to me, there shouldn't have been a kind of identical scoreline to what we saw a year ago. And I mean, ever since he beat Yannick the first time, which was such a good, nice, and of course, in a final set tiebreak, and he's lost every tiebreak they played since. And that also doesn't make sense to me. Sinner, no doubt, don't get me wrong, Sinner has now emerged as almost a new Novak.
Yes.
And the way he plays tie breaks, and he gives you nothing, and he's going to end up having a career record in the tiebreak, probably quite similar to Novak's in percentage. So I don't want to shortchange him. But Ben being a lefty, having that big left-handed serve, playing on grass, I mean, I just feel like Ben should be winning some of these breakers from Sinner, and he's not. And that's what's killing him, because especially given the return deficiencies that you just alluded to, then you're going to have to rely on winning breakers to have any chance to win, and it's just not happening. So I must admit, I thought it was a good tournament. Another nice win over Sonego. He had some good moments, and he's such a joy to watch in so many ways. And again, you look at the father-son team and the great job his father's doing. He's made progress, to be sure, but I don't know, that Sinner match was a bit. It was a bit disappointing to me that he didn't make at least some inroads and maybe grab a set or play a better breaker. It wasn't quite what I was expecting from Ben this time, given the number of times he's played Yannick, and he knows what's required of him. And I even saw his father. There were a couple of times the camera was on his father. You know how upbeat he always remains. And there was a bit of a furrowed brow a few times. He was a bit perplexed a few times as well.
Yeah, I guess he'll learn from it, and hopefully, the next time he's in these tie breaks against Yannick, he can do a little better and keep improving that return, because that's still, for a guy who has got so many other great qualities, if that just got 10% better, 15% better, he could do some.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I mean, like, I guess in some ways the clay, the clay might be the better surface for him compared to grass, just because of that little extra time on the forehand. I mean, we saw how great he played in that Carlos match. I mean, I walked away from that match being so impressed by Ben. Like, that's the most high I've been on Ben.
I was too.
Carlos.
I was too, but I thought he was going to take, and maybe you're right, maybe it is the time, but I thought he was going to take the progress he'd made there and pushing Carlos the way he did in Roland Garros, and maybe go to the next level on grass. He hasn't gotten there yet, but he will. I still say, Vanch, we talk about the return, but and I granted, Yannick just squeezed out a break at the end of the second and third sets, so that's nothing to, and no disgrace. But I'd like to see Ben become the kind of server, and thinking back to the days of, say, people like Richard Krajicek or Goran Ivanisevic, or obviously Pete, but where you feel like you're gonna, even if you're Sinner, that you're gonna be lucky to get one break out of him, particularly on the lawns of Wimbledon.
Yeah.
And we're not there. And I feel like his father has talked about not wanting him to serve 145 all the time. That if you don't locate it well, it's coming back. Okay, but how about locating it better in general? Why? I still think that serve could be so much better than it is. And I'm hoping in the next year that we're going to see that, because I think if the placement were better, that would just make him so much scarier to play.
Totally agree. Totally. That's one of the main things that, still I feel like he can get so much better at. So, yeah, good point. I guess also, Flavio Caboli emerging out of that section, I thought was impressive, because you had Draper in there, Cilic, Bublik. I mean, we were mostly looking at Bublik and Draper maybe as potential people to emerge out of that section, but it ended up being Flavio. And, I got to say, I like, he's like one of the fastest players on the tour, Flavio, the way he's like covering the court and just how, like how well he moves. And the serve really surprised me this tournament. I didn't expect him to come out serving 135, 140s that consistently. And also how well he pushed Novak, and, the way he wins that fourth set from a breakdown against Cilic. I mean, he really showed something here that I think
he did. I agree with you. And actually, it's funny you said that about the serve, because Novak, that was really one of the first things he said after the match. He surprised me with his serving. Now, I will say it was interesting how it changed, because even as big as he served in the first set, Novak was constantly on him. He finally got the break, but it was every time the guy served, it was love 30. He was in trouble in almost every. But then as the match progressed, he began to serve more unreturnables, many more aces and unreturnables. It was much more consistent. And Novak had to squeeze out those breaks in the third and fourth, which he did at the crucial times there late in those sets. But he had a great tournament, and he's going to be right in the thick of that Italian contingent now. I mean, I see him playing sort of at a Musetti level.
Yeah.
Being on Musetti. Obviously, Sinner's going to be far and away their star, but we're going to have him in there. He and Musetti, and it's just a great time. We'll both be well above Sonego in my view.
Yes.
But that was an exciting run, and he acquitted himself well, because as you notice, Vanch, I'm sure, I mean, he squeezed out that first set despite Novak serving for it, and despite Novak making that nice comeback in the tiebreak to get back to 6-all, and he wins the breaker. Then the air went out of his tires for a while, for lack of a better way of putting it, and and apparently it was something with the leg, and you could see he wasn't quite physically
right with the quads.
The quads, right? Yeah, and you could see something was wrong, but then whatever was going on there, it straightened itself out, because in the third and fourth he was back. The movement was back, and he was competing really well again. And listen, he should be very proud of that effort. He should be proud of that tournament.
Yeah.
And I think he was a bit fortunate to play Cilic on a very windy day, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I think that affected Marin's serve. And
definitely.
I think on a calmer day, maybe Marin doesn't get broke. Maybe Marin wins that in 4 instead of the other way around. But very good tournament for him. And by the way, a good fellow. You notice how he came around when Novak took the bad fall near the end. He comes around to check on him. But beyond that, it's just his spirit overall and how he conducts himself. He's very likable. Listen, the Italians are spoiled, Vanch. That's all there is to it. They are really spoiled right now. They have never had it so good.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if we have 3 of them in the top 10. Him, Musetti, and Sinner. Like I could really see him being in the top 10 sometime.
I agree.
Next few months, I really like the progress he's made. So. Him, but and then obviously I guess maybe I'm curious to see how Jack Draper bounces back, because that obviously to lose in the second round is going to be disappointing again. And granted, Marin Cilic played some vintage tennis, and he really earned that win. But I'm curious to see, especially with the U.S. Open semifinal points coming up to defend, and just how good Jack has been the first half of the year, like outside of the even outside the slams. I'm curious to see how that goes, because on his day he can still be maybe the best contender for that number 3 guy.
Well, I think so. I do. I think that's a good assessment. I mean, look, he was trying to point toward Wimbledon. It didn't work out. He made some pretty good self-critical comments about how he didn't feel he was playing well on the grass, and he was getting rushed in errors on his forehand in a way that was not happening on the clay. And it was good evaluation, I thought, where he just kind of looking at how he needs to improve on the grass, and he didn't play very well at Queens. He won some grinded out some, not grinded out, but he managed to guts out some of those matches at Queens. But
I think he also wasn't feeling well in Queens. He had like some kind of illness, and he didn't want to talk about it. And yeah, he never really got his good. He never got.
Well, it showed. Really. I would believe that because it showed in his play. And then maybe it was just a little too much for him this year to deal with the possibility of threatening to win the tournament. He will someday. But in the near term, you pointed to an interesting stretch ahead where he's going to go back out on the hard courts and then try to get back to the Open and defend the semifinal points. And I think with the right kind of a draw, he could do that. But I still think what's most important about him is the drive, the determination. He wants it so badly. And you kind of alluding to that with Taylor. But I feel with Jack, that's how it is with him. He's very demanding of himself. He's expecting the very best from himself, and I think because of it's kind of a unique game in today's game. You know, the big left-handed serve. He's got it. It's a whole different kind of game from Ben, I think, and I actually like. I frankly prefer his forehand to Ben's for a variety of reasons.
Yeah,
but I think he's going to keep getting better. I think with the Wimbledon loss behind him, he'll just get on with trying to do well on the hard and try to pick up as many points as he can over the summer, by the way, in Canada and Cincinnati, so that protecting the Open points becomes less significant. And but either way, he'll have a shot at getting back to the semis in New York. That wouldn't shock me if he managed that feat.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how he and Taylor do with his warm-ups, because semifinal and final points, and I think they didn't do as well last year in this time of the year. So
right,
they can definitely do well and then make up and then feel less pressure come the Open. And yeah, I'm curious to see also how Zverev rebounds. You know, obviously Medvedev continues to struggle, and it's gonna be key for those guys to, you know, kind of regain their footing. So.
I don't know what to expect from. I'm still not optimistic about Medvedev. I'm intrigued that Zverev, who talked about this kind of crisis he's going through mentally, not just with tennis, but maybe just in a downcast frame of mind with life.
He doesn't look right mentally at all since the Australian Open. Like not for a single tournament I felt like, Zverev looks like he's, you know, ready to contend and be in that spot. And
no, you're right.
He could really use something like this. Yeah.
But what I'm saying, I guess my point is that I thought it was a good sign that he was visiting with the Nadal Academy, because at least it shows that whatever's going on with his mood and whether there's some kind of depression or whatever the issue is, and clearly it's there, he's still being professional and trying to figure out how to get better and how to turn things around, or else you wouldn't have seen him at the Academy. He said we'd know by, what did he say? We'd know by Canada or Cincinnati. So I hope that he makes a move like that, because the father, I don't think his father's a bad guy at all, and I don't think his father interferes the way Tsitsipas's father once did. But I still think he could use the outside counsel himself. It could really be beneficial to Zverev and might inspire him and might help to shift his mood and make him a happier human being. Yeah,
well, it'll be interesting to see how that all translates on the court, and you know, these next 3 events, how much Novak is going to play. You know, Sinner, I pretty much expect him to be at the final end of, you know, all these tournaments, and Alcaraz as well. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be exciting to see what's going on. And the events are going to be 2 weeks this year instead of 1. So there's that change as well. We'll see how that affects the players. The mixed doubles event just before the U.S. Open. So there's a lot of tennis these guys are going to have to play. I hope they'll be fresh by the time the Open comes.
You know what, Bunch? I get a feeling, I don't know how to predict the schedule of the others. I can't imagine Novak does anything but Cincinnati. I don't see him coming back in time for Canada. But Cincinnati, I think he'll want to at least try to get a few matches in there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would be shocked if he played both. So yeah, I mean, I think we essentially recapped pretty much everything. You know, we started with the women this time, and that was good because I really wanted to give Iga her due for her triumph there, and was impressive.
And then, Banch, I just want to say one more thing regarding Iga that your listeners ought to know, and that because you and I went back and forth a lot about her early in the year, and I was getting a bit pessimistic myself as someone who admires her, but I didn't like where things were headed. But you really had a good, clear sense. You never, it wasn't even a matter of not giving up on her. You really never stopped believing in a big way. So I think perhaps the least surprised person in tennis circles right now about her reemergence and this revitalized woman is you. And I commend you on having seen that so well. And I thought it was based not even on emotions, just on your analysis, and you had it spot on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, sometimes you just have a feeling when it comes to these players who are like, reaching that all-time great status, where I just feel like sometimes they get written off too quickly. And I felt like that was the case with Iga as well. Like, a few bad results, but I didn't feel like it would take much for a player of her caliber to turn it around. And, I'm glad I was proven right in that respect.
Well, Vanch, this has been fun as always, I am glad we switched it around. It just gave it a freshness that we'd start with the women this time and just break with our usual format. But it made sense because I had not planned to sort of get going on Iga at the start of the podcast, but I just did. So thank you for sort of playing off that.
No, awesome. It was really exciting. I love doing these recaps. I can't wait for the one after New York, and hopefully I'll see you there, and we'll have a good time. Yeah.
I hope so, Vanch. It would be. I'd look forward to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.